have many different kinds of people together in the same room. And I really, really love that. And I want to welcome all of you and thank our co-hosting organizations.
So this evening's program is going to be trying to figure out how Bunch developed that worldview and what he did with that. And to do that, we have Dr. Michael Crane and Jim Dankovich, who will explore the events, the philosophy, and the personal experiences of Dr. Ralph Bunch and how they informed his view of the world.
And racism, as he charged that race is the great American shibboleth. Great sins have been committed in its name. It has been used to whitewash some of the blackest pages in American history. And in the years after World War II, as he worked for the Department of State, he also clearly understood, quote, segregation handicaps the nation in international relations. Yet, in bringing my comments to a close here, I would argue that Bunch's views on the world of race that he formulated during the 1930s was essential in creating the consummate negotiator who emerged in a world racked by a destructive world war, a brewing Cold War, the slow but steady destruction of colonialism, and the almost inevitable battles between peoples, nations, and ideologies that arose from this chaos. Bunch's views that he developed in that small volume in 1936 allowed him to look beyond the personal, racial, national, and political division. Instead of picking sides in the great debates of his time, he instead was able to apply a more empathetic and nuanced view of the opposing sides he worked to bring together, whether in the Middle East, Africa, or Asia in the years after World War II.
Article 5 states, a free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of all colonial claims based upon a strict observance of the principle that in determining all such questions of sovereignty, and this is in big letters, interests of the populations that are concerned, that they must have equal weight with the gaining nation.
All right, so we have 4 questions in the queue, okay? And some of them, people are asking similar questions, so we have things on our minds. The first one, this may be a Michael question. How did Ralph Bunch join the State Department? And then how did he enter to the United Nations?
Well, he joined the State Department. First was really brought in by some of the offices during World War II as the United States was looking at these places which it had not really had any great knowledge about, particularly Africa, which prior to World War II it had been more than happy to simply let the British and French and Germans and whoever else was there do whatever they wanted to. And so he was brought in to work with the OSS for a while, the precursor of the CIA. And from there, one of the things that did happen during World War II, he established a friendship with Dean Rusk. Dean Rusk was one of the people that I think encouraged him to try and get into Department of State work, which was not easy. It was, keep in mind, since the Rogers Act passed in 1924, which was supposed to create a democratic foreign service, 5 African Americans had been admitted into the foreign service. And every one of them had been sent to the Negro Circuit. But Ralph Bunch, he found a niche with his work on Africa, with the way in which he was able to strategically think about the issues that were facing Africa and the United States. And I think the fact that he didn't seek, although it's talked about, he didn't seek a position as an official diplomat, as a minister, as an ambassador, I think that helped keep him in some ways out of the limelight.
You're so right there. Ralph Bunche did not aspire to positions. Ralph Bunche aspired to do what the agencies wanted from him, knowing that he was the best source and resource. When he was at the Department of State, although they depended totally on the benefits of his research, his position is not really a position. They gave a name to the position for him, but they found that every time they had an issue, the guy that had to come and unravel everything happened to have been Ralph Bunche. He happened into every position in a leadership position, which goes all the way into how did he become the whole business of Palestine. He wasn't sent there to do that. He wasn't even in the picture. But he just happened to do it. Dunbarton Oaks, when they were drafting the articles for the new United Nations at the 1945 conference in San Francisco, Ralph Bunche, with his State Department colleague, name not important, he wrote the input for chapters 10, 11, and 12 on the train from Washington to San Francisco. And when he gave it to the head of the delegation, now he was just an advisor. He wasn't a member of the delegation. He was an advisor to the delegation. And when he gave this draft that he had worked on the train, and our delegation wasn't ready for that because we had some problems too. You know, we had the Wake Island, Marshall Islands. We had a whole. We didn't call them colonists. But, you know, we had some possessions sitting out here, and they weren't ready to talk about that. So what did Ralph Bunche do? He turned to his Australian colleague and said, "Here, it's already ready. Take care of it." And it's called Article 10, 11, and 12.
Okay.
No,
Sorry.
that's right. Give us the inside scoop, Mr. Dandridge. All right, next question. Can the speakers speak a little further about Ralph Bunche's African independence efforts and his armistice efforts that led to him becoming a Nobel laureate?
Well, certainly he'd already laid out before World War II, in many of his publications, including A Worldview of Race, that what was happening is that nations and peoples in Africa, Asia, elsewhere, are simply being brutalized, exploited, humiliated, and disenfranchised of almost any rights by these colonial powers. And I don't think Ralph Bunche never backed away from that idea. He didn't phrase it in racial terms. He was very clear in his early writings, although, yes, his views did change a bit after World War II. But he was very clear in those writings that race wasn't the determining factor. It was economics, and simply they used race as a way to defend this, to justify this, to reconcile it with their ludicrous talks about bringing civilization, bringing democracy, and bringing freedom, and helping backward people to achieve their goals. They use that because without it, as he said, what rationale would they have for colonization? That, well, we want to brutalize people, we want to exploit people, we want to take everything away from them. Well, of course we don't, because that's not our public persona. We're here to help people, uplift people. And race was the factor that enabled him to do that.
All right. Next question. Given Ralph Bunche's legacy and worldview, what do you think he would say? It's a two-part question. One, what do you think he would say about the present conflict between Palestine and Israel? And for those of us who are working directly on these topics, what lessons can we learn towards moving to a peaceful resolution?
I'll let you handle that one, Jim.
That's a very good question. No, it is a very good question, because even if you ask Ralph Bunch, he would say that's a very good question. That's how Ralph Bunch went into the Rhodes Treaty negotiation. We all know the story about how he got there. Count Bernadette, who was the observer for Palestine and Israel. He was the observer. Ralph Bunch just happened to be a part of the group. He wasn't the number 2 person. And in fact, we wouldn't be talking about Ralph Bunch if it had not been for the fact that a part of Count Bernadette's group, the secretary was a British woman, and the Brits don't carry diplomatic passports. So Bernadette said, I've got to get there. And there were some other things that had to be taken care of. So Ralph said, okay, I'll stay back and take care of this. I'll join you. Go on. And of course, the Stern gang was waiting for them. And Ralph Bunch's name was on the list. And the person that sat in the seat that Ralph Bunch was supposed to be sitting in, unfortunately, was the beneficiary of the Stern gang. They were all killed. And Ralph Bunch happened to be the next person available. And Ralph Bunch he did a smart thing. He said, well, okay, this is now, the British moved out the day that Israel was declared a state. The British moved out, the mandate system goes out with the British. And there are 4 Arab states, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt, all attack Israel. And the UN said, do something. And, and I'm quite sure that type of question went to him. What do I do? And the first thing he did is said, well, let's not talk here in the area. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go to Rhodes. That's a nice sleepy place. Nothing happens in Rhodes except ping pong and billiards. And Ralph Bunch, he didn't use fancy negotiations. He used sociological, psychological, his knowledge of anthropology, his knowledge of people. And after a couple of weeks, he got the Egyptians, he got the Lebanese, the Syrians, talking to each other. Now, how did he do that? They were always talking with their headquarters. They were not talking to anybody there at Rhodes. Ralph Bunch did not set up time schedules. Okay, we're going to meet tomorrow morning from 12 to blah, blah, blah. It just worked. As long as we're awake, we work. And at night, we shoot billiards. And then one day he sent word to all the representatives. Meet me in my bedroom. Weird. And they all went down. And he opened up a drawer. And he pulled out some beautiful commemorative plates. And on those plates was inscribed Rhodes Treaty Negotiation 1948, 49, 48, yeah. He said, you see these plates? I bought these pretty plates for you guys. Now this is, I'm not telling the story here, this is what happened. I bought these pretty plates. And I plan to give these plates to you after you all sign. Now, if you don't sign, I'm going to break these plates across every one of your damn heads. And they did what you just did. They all started laughing, and for the first time, they talked to each other. And guess what? within 48 hours, the treaty was signed. Now, will place work today? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's difficult when we look at somebody like Ralph Bunche, and I think, well, Jim and I knew that question was coming, about how we would handle things today. It's a really difficult question to answer because Ralph Bunche had these successes, had his work at a very specific time in history, and things change. Things have changed dramatically in some ways. I think many of the things that Ralph Bunche talked about as being diversions from some of the major issues that he saw, the racial hatreds, the ethnic hatreds, the religious hatreds, the nationalism, the blind nationalism that he talked about. All of that has just been so inflamed over the last few years for a variety of reasons. You wonder what he would be able to do in terms of trying to cope with that. But I think I agree with Jim. If there's anyone who could come up with some sort of viable solution for what seems to be a completely...
Well, you know, two things were happening there. Number one, a mediator, that's the world's worst job. Because nobody likes you. You're not going to get everything that you want. That's a given. And so, and there's no way that you can promise or you can give the desired percentile of what you want. And I would like to suggest something else about understanding Ralph Bunche. A lot of the things that I got to know on Ralph Bunche was by reading Ruth's letters, his wife, Ruth Bunche. Ralph Bunche spent more time working than he did with his family. And you must say that was a tight family. Because he was always out for the UN trying to negotiate or get involved in conflict resolution. But when you read the letters that he wrote to Ruth, he comes out and he says it like it is. He says, you know, I was talking to so-and-so, and those people, and he would go on and he would really let himself. So I would commend those of you who are interested in studying this phenomenon, who was Ralph Bunche, read the letters that he wrote to Ruth.
Awesome. So we are going to move to our closing question. Thank you. We have so many here that we haven't been able to get to. I think that just speaks to the interest and just the resignation of what you all have said and sparked in terms of topic and idea. So my last question is to you, Mr. Dandridge. Many of my peers feel compelled to act against injustices and inequality in our society, particularly affecting the Black community. However, as a young Black professional, many of us are still reckoning with the stigma or even the professional repercussions or consequences that comes with being a disruptor of some of these systems and institutions of power. Even when we look at the life of Ralph Bunche, of his peers, linked arms with MLK Jr., supporting with Ambassador Andrew Young and others who faced unimaginable obstacles, and some even paid the greatest price, their life, in the fight for justice. What advice do you have for young Black and Brown and all professionals who have to play this balancing act of not being considered, quote, radical for fear of consequences at work or in society?
Okay. For those of you who are from Harvard, as I recall, and this has been a lot of years now, over the portal of my dormitory door was an inscription, called, "Unto thine own self be true." And I came from Selma, Alabama. I watched the Edmund Pettus Bridge being built in 1940. And I personally never considered myself as being oppressed. I came from a school system that probably ranked number 40, and there were 48 states then. That probably ranked number 49 out of 48 states. But we had the best damn teachers you'll find anywhere. And my prescription for myself was, do what you want to do. And do it your way. There is no magic prescription. Yes, there are institutional approaches. And they are very good institutional approaches. And if you are so inclined, be a part of the institution. The NAACP was established in 1911, I think it was. And wonderful things came out of the NAACP, and still come out of the NAACP. The Urban League still does wonderful things. BPIA is doing wonderful things. Thursday Luncheon Group is doing outstanding things within the system for diplomats of color. And if you feel that you want to be a Terry Totman, be a Terry Totman, but make sure you're equipped to be a Terry Totman when you do it. So the answer is how, and I'm going to go back now to my professor, Alan Locke. Culture determines who I am, not my race. And my personal recommendation is be a part of an institutional approach, if that is how you are so inclined, but recognize the capabilities and the abilities within thine own self.
Thank you. And with that, I think we will be concluding the program. Before we depart, can we have all the Black ambassadors in the room please stand for recognition? If you are an ambassador who is of African or African American descent, can you please stand up? Because on this Black History Month, we recognize each of you for the obstacles, the things that your peers may not have seen, that you have experienced, the doors that you have opened, so that the next generation will come through. We thank you and we applaud each of you on Black History Month this year at Doc Corbitt House. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude today's program. And I will pass it on.
Presentation from Myra and Sally.
And we have a presentation from Ms. Myra and Sally. If they can join at the podium now, please. Please give them a round of applause and welcome them. Thank you. Thank you.
So at the start of the evening, I mentioned the Ralph Bunche Centenary. And during the course of that amazing year, we had the privilege of working with a great many people. One of them was Sally Schwartz, who was instrumental in bringing DC Public School students into a Bunche Scholars Program, which she will discuss.
Very briefly. So I really didn't know much about Ralph Bunche when I was contacted. I was working in DC Public Schools, and of course it was Jim Dandridge who contacted me, and we talked about putting a program together. This ended up being a 3-week program. It seems like it was 3 months, right? But it was a 3-week summer program for DC public high school students. I think we had 18 in all. And our purpose was to use the life of Ralph Bunche as a way to understand diplomacy, international affairs. It was not billed as a diplomacy program. We started out looking at what it was like to grow up in a segregated city, which is what Ralph Bunche's life was. And of course, living in Washington, D.C. There are a lot of people that live here that grew up in those circumstances. And so we used his life as a way for students to sort of get a lot of information and inspiration. So that was just made it so rich. And the other thing that made it just such a great program was that there were so many people like Jim, Ambassador Todman, Ambassador Ron Palmer, Herschel Challoner from USAID, Ron Walters, who was then at University of Maryland. There's so many fantastic people. We did a trip to the United Nations, and Ben Rivlin and Sir Brian Urquhart met with our students. Everyone was so open. And of course, these are contacts and really deep conversations that they were able to engage in. That is just so far from their daily life as students. So Jim, I know, wanted me to mention what happened at the UN. Am I right, real quickly? So when we went to the United Nations, and this is after 2.5 weeks of learning about Ralph Bunche, we took a tour of the UN. And this is a little book we did. Of course, there was nothing digital back in those days, so we have a little paper book. But after visiting the United Nations, this is what the students wrote. The tour of the United Nations was very informative, and the exhibits were interesting. But Bunche was nowhere to be found. A man of such importance to the UN and peacekeeping should be represented here. We were upset. And then there's another little picture of Ralph Bunche Park at the UN. I don't know what it looks like now, but they wrote, "We were not very impressed with the size of the Ralph Bunche Park or the statue across from the United Nations building." We left there, the kids were really upset. And we left there and we met with Ben Rivlin at CUNY. And they shared how ticked off they were. And Ben Rivlin said to them, "You should write a letter. You should do something about it. You should write a letter." And they did write a letter, which we are donating to
the Dakar Museum.
To the Dakar Museum. And they did get a response from the United Nations. They wrote it to Kofi Annan. They got a response. And then they did put in an exhibit at the United Nations.
Can I
I know you have the...
Can I take a piece of that?
Yeah.
It'll only just take 1 minute. This program, we started off, Sally brought in, we say, bring in students who are motivated. Don't bring us all of your A students. Bring us motivated students from Anacostia, from all representative of the District of Columbia. And the first day that we went in and sat down and looked, and we said, what in the world have we got ourselves into? We focused on the Rhodes Treaty negotiation as the base point of their entry-level understanding what diplomacy was all about. And as Sally mentioned, they went to the UN. Kofi Annan, who was Ralph Bunche's assistant and successor, was the advisor to Kofi Annan. And he was working with us on this project. And so Sally said, we have this letter from the students. And so Brian Urquhart said, send it up here. And on the day of the unveiling of the commemorative stamp for Ralph Bunche, Kofi Annan said, a bunch of students from Washington, D.C. were here recently. And they noticed that there is nothing that celebrates the first successful example of conflict resolution solved by the United Nations. That will change. I went up about 2 or 3 months later, and there was a corridor dedicated to the Rhodes Treaty negotiation in Ralph Bunch. And we say, job well done.
Just the last thing, because I felt this last question, and just the discussion, maybe look to this. We had the students at the end write down their favorite quotes, because they were constantly sort of hearing Bunch's voice. And so there were a couple quotes that I wanted to share. So this is Ralph Bunch speaking, except for this first one. Never pick a fight, but never run away from one either if your dignity or important principle is involved. That was Nana's advice. That was Ralph Bunch's grandmother. The second one was, if you want to get across an idea, wrap it up in a person, which is really our philosophy about the program. But to make our way, we must have firm resolve, persistence, tenacity. We must gear ourselves to work hard all the way. We can never let up. And the last quote I will say is, we can never have too much preparation and training. We must be a strong competitor. We must adhere staunchly to the basic principle that anything less than full equality is not enough. If we compromise on that principle, our soul is dead.